So what is the cleanest source of renewable energy? The only truly renewable ones are things like solar, wind, hydro. And really wind and hydro are another form of solar energy because the weather systems have converted the solar energy into the wind or into the movement of water that we use. So those are genuinely completely renewable and completely clean at first sight, but actually not quite completely, because you have to build the systems that generate the power. And to build the wind turbines costs a lot of energy and a lot of disruption. And particularly, of course, to build big dams can be extremely damaging to the environment. China has suffered very badly from this in some cases. Very damaging to people downstream too, in the way the changings occur in the flow of the river. So none of these things are without some impact. Nothing is completely and utterly clean. I think some of the things like bioethanol are much more doubtful than people think they are, and worst of all, perhaps fuel from palm oil. If you fly over some areas of this part of Southeast Asia, all you see is huge tracts of land destroyed by palm oil plantations. So nothing's absolutely for free. Man will always make a big impact on the environment, whichever source of energy you use. I personally believe nuclear power has a big part to play. There is a perception which is from the past, from when it was associated with nuclear bombs, when some of the systems were very badly designed and made. I think modern nuclear power could be far more of a supplier of energy, which really is with far less environmental impact than, say, coal or gas. You will hear people talk about fusion for the future. I personally have considerable doubts that that will ever be a real source of practical power. The first thing you have to recognize about hydrogen is that in a certain sense it is not a source of energy. There are no hydrogen mines. You can't go and dig it up. It doesn't come out of holes in the ground. You have to make it. And all the ways of making hydrogen consume energy. So hydrogen in many ways is never a source of energy. Hydrogen might be a way to make energy portable. For example, we might have nuclear power, but you're not going to have nuclear-powered cars. That's completely ridiculous and impractical. If we ran out of petrol, really ran out of petrol and low-pressure gas, then we don't have any batteries that will take your car from here to, what should we say, Harvey or something. There is no battery big enough to do that. They're too big, too heavy. But you could use your nuclear electricity to make hydrogen and use the hydrogen to power the car. So it's essentially a way to store energy and to make it portable. That said, there are lots of problems. Hydrogen is pretty nasty stuff in many ways. It's very explosive, very inflammable. It tends to affect some materials and make them go brittle and do strange things. So it's somewhat difficult and dangerous stuff to handle. You would have to put in a whole infrastructure to distribute the hydrogen. You'd have to have hydrogen stations, just like we have to have petrol stations. That would be a huge cost to build them. But maybe, probably in the fairly distant future, that will be used, particularly, I would suspect, for transport fuels. But it is not a source of energy. It's a way of moving energy around. How does the fluctuating price of fuel affect things? Well, that's really probably more a question for an economist than for somebody like me. I'm half a physicist, half an engineer. There is absolutely no doubt that changing prices does change people's behavior in the end. I think that the classic example is really America. I've been to America many, many times, and frankly, the cars most Americans drive are simply ridiculous. They use crazy amounts of fuel, which are completely unnecessary. That is wasting a valuable resource, which is going to run out, and it's dumping vast amounts of carbon into the atmosphere to move tons of metal around with an enormous engine for no purpose whatsoever, when you could use something much smaller. It's been very clear in America that as the price of petrol has risen, gas as the Americans would call it, has risen, they have started to move to lighter weight, smaller engined cars, and that trend does show some signs of continuing. You have things like the Prius, the Toyota car, which uses energy recovery. As it slows down, it puts the energy into a battery, which it then uses to speed itself up. I drive one of those, I have one. People, they can hardly make these things fast enough. Everybody wants a Prius because they're seen as green, and they use remarkably little petrol. So I have just changed the central heating boiler, the thing that heats my house. I mean, here in Malaysia you don't often need to heat your house, you need to cool your house, but in Britain we need to heat the house in the winter. It was worth my while to change the boiler to a more efficient heating boiler because the price of gas had gone up a lot, so it was worth the investment to do that. So just as a sort of personal, pragmatic point of view, I've no doubt that as you increase the price, people's behaviour changes. I personally think that particularly in America, gas petrol is far too cheap. They should double or triple the price of petrol. The problem is that politicians can never do that because they don't get elected if they do that. So unfortunately, the democratic system we have makes it very difficult for politicians to take very long-term decisions. Put the price of gas up, you save the world and lose the next election. And politicians don't tend to do that. But you're really asking me about a question about something I don't know much about professionally. They're just personal views. Short term, so the question is then, is it better to try and make existing systems more efficient or to find new sources of energy? I think in the shorter term, better efficiency is extremely worthwhile. It's quite clear that many of the systems we use are extremely inefficient. And they're inefficient because in the past, when they were designed, efficiency really didn't matter very much. Energy was very cheap. We hadn't started to have the problems of global warming, so nobody cared very much about efficiency. So there is a lot of room to improve the efficiency of many types of machinery. I would say it's not only about improving the efficiency of the machinery, it's about changing people's behavior as well. Because changing your behavior can save an awful lot of energy. In the longer term, new sources of energy are going to become absolutely essential, or we're going to have to change our way of life dramatically. And so it will become essential to use nuclear power, fusion if it could be done, solar, wind. There'll be no choice if we want to maintain our current sort of lifestyle. So you have to do both, but efficiency is probably the short-term one, and other sources possibly the longer-term one.